Okay. I'd like to call to order the public meeting number 35 of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on November 13th at 1 o'clock p.m. First order of business I think we may skip, which is the minutes. We haven't had a chance to read those, so we'll hold on the minutes until next week. Item number 3 is project work plan, and starting out with the procurement to get an organization to help us do the background research. Commissioner Zuniga?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I intended but did not include a memo as part of the packet with a recommendation, but I believe Director Kulowski can provide an update on, as she's just arriving, on this matter, as she has been doing a lot of the administrative proceedings, if that's...
Sure. Do you want to take a minute to get your jacket off?
Yeah. And is this with regards to the procurement?
Investigations procurement.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I was just updating the commission that I intended to include a memo with a recommendation, which we don't have at this point, but you could perhaps give us an update on the status.
Right. The procurement team met several times last week to review the submissions from the bidders. We had what we call the Phase 2 technical scoring, which is looking at the response to the actual business response, how well the responders could respond to that. Once those scores were completed and approved by the procurement team, we then opened the cost responses. In this particular procurement, 90% of the score went to the technical and 10% to the cost. We then apportioned the cost. There's a mathematical algorithm that we did. We have come up with what we would call an apparent successful bidder. I am reluctant to say anything about who that is at this particular time, but we are going to commence negotiations, contract negotiations with them this week. I would hope that we would have those substantively on the way so that either at the next meeting or the following meeting that we could do that. But until we have a contract in hand with both parties agreeing to it, I feel that we're still within the procurement process.
And at that time, we could submit a recommendation for a vote on the actual or the particulars of the contract. Is that
yes?
Is that our approach?
Is that more appropriate than voting now with the caveat that obviously we have to have a successful contract negotiation?
I think that it is. I know that this is a process we haven't been through as a commission in the past, but that has been the way that I have done it. Just on the off chance that there's some problem that occurs between the particular vendor that we've chosen to work with for whatever reason in terms of coming to an agreement. I don't foresee any problems to happen.
So we could probably be prepared by next Tuesday?
I know that we were meeting with them this week to start the negotiations. It would seem that it's a relatively simple negotiation that we would be able to announce it next Tuesday.
I think it's important that we make Tuesday the deadline to try to get it done. As you said, it doesn't have to be absolutely done, but
right.
needs to know that a sufficient meeting of the minds is available that we can make it public, because I think even if there's not something technically signed, time is short, and we need to have our acting director of IEB be able to start to work with these people to set up the process and so forth.
I agree, and I think beginning the process, talking about what the investigation process is going to be and how the vendor is going to handle it, what the responsibilities are of the commission or the IEB, is part of the negotiation process. So that's why this meeting has been scheduled. How we are going to go about implementing this contract is as much about coming to terms, payment terms, or any sorts of other things as anything else.
So are you involved in that meeting?
Yes.
You're scheduled to be in that meeting?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay. The scope of licensing and RFA1 status report, are there anything?
I do have a report from the consultants
Okay.
that I was sent. The consultants have prepared for and met with applicants and prospective applicant representatives last week. I know some of that was spoken about regarding the comprehensive identification of the persons who are identified as qualifiers. The consultants have been examining the submissions that were given to them last week, preparing responses to inquiries which have been ongoing from the people that they met with, and then conducting research for the preparation of their final recommendations. They're also in receipt of the framework for addressing policy questions, which I know the Commission is working on. There was a recent update of that. I view this, when I'm doing the scheduling, as being really the base part of developing Phase 2 regulations, is answering these policy questions. They are providing guidance to the Commission as necessary on the development of the most efficient processes. They're also, with regards to the Phase 1 scope of licensing investigations, been determining which regulatory agencies, both domestic and international, should be contacted and cross-referenced to fully investigate and evaluate the applicant submissions. And evaluations and discussions have taken place and are continuing regarding the intersection of local government and the Gaming Commission applicant evaluation process and the various timing issues that can impact compliance with all the mandatory, statutory, and regulatory standards. They're working closely with the Ombudsman regarding this. That is their report.
We're in touch, we're in touch on where they are in the process of getting these things? Are they going to come back to us? They're going to make recommendations to us, right, next on?
Regarding the scope of licensing?
Yeah.
Yes, I think Friday is the deadline for
Right.
people to submit waivers. So they will look at that and they will submit the
Right.
recommendations to us, but I would guess that that would be after Thanksgiving and not
Right.
before. They would need some time to evaluate that.
Okay, great.
And what is it that they're doing with respect to addressing a matrix, creating a matrix or other process for resolving the policy questions?
They're working with you all on that. I've sent them copies of the policy questions, and I think that they're looking at the places where they can add value to the discussions that the groups
And I
are
think
intending to have.
they volunteered to have a phone call with any of us who wanted them
Yes.
for our topics. And so they're looking into those topics now and are waiting for us to say who needs the meeting, which one thing we'll talk about in the next item here. Oh, my goodness.
I know.
Look who's here. Welcome. Things are looking up around here now. I was welcoming Beam Thomas, who left the governor's office recently and was one of the lead negotiators on the Gaming Commission. Nice to have you here with your new hat on.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so that jumps right into the key policy questions. There are two notes here. One is, are there high priority questions? I think we sort of put that to rest. There are, but we're not going to deal with even the most high priority questions until the 3-week period, the comment period that we agreed on is passed. But as I've gone through mine, John Ziemba and I, particularly the Ombudsman and I, went through the 10 or 15 that are in my area. And it seemed to us that it made sense to have some kind of a public hearing process above and beyond the already agreed to comment period. And I haven't quite thought through how that would work, but I wanted to talk about that with you all. I mean, here's, for example, here's just some of the ones that we noted. We are answering the question about whether there should be required content for the host community agreement. Should we approve the wording of the host community agreement before the referendum? Should we say something about selection criteria if there's more than one proposal on a ballot? should we prohibit gambling by local officials within their own jurisdictions? Should we license region by region or simultaneously, et cetera? I mean, pretty big stuff that a lot of people are gonna have an interest in. On the other hand, they're gonna have a chance to submit written comments. So I think we sort of felt like sort of the abundance of caution strategy, sort of the abundance of transparency. John, do you want to speak at all as to what you know, why you thought that? Do you have anything particular to add to that conversation?
I think my thought regarding additional process relates to some of my communications with the communities and with the applicants where, and I know this is a loose standard, but if things rise to a certain level where it would be expected, especially if there's statutory matters or statutory determinations, that further input might be involved, especially if we have to make a finding which may impact, for example, a whole regional or a whole license application, that might rise to an additional level of input where we would take into account some of the facts and circumstances that we would have to make for determinations whether or not we met a certain statutory standard to move on.
You mean a statutory standard about whether a hearing was required?
No, my statutory standard, if for example, we had to make a decision regarding whether or not to move forward with a license in a particular region based on a number of other factors, that perhaps we would need to get further input from some of the communities regarding that determination, if it involved meeting a statutory test in order to move forward. I guess I'm being a little bit vague, but
Yeah.
As a general proposition, I'm highly in favor of more transparency.
Yeah.
But how are we gonna decide what issues what issues a period of public hearing would add value to, in addition to the written comments we receive? I mean, we're gonna solicit and have solicited written comments on
Right.
all of these policy areas. It seems to me that we could get in the written submissions some responses that raise questions that we would like to hear more about in an oral presentation. But it may also be that there are some where we just ought to schedule an oral hearing and invite people to come in. Have we thought about how we would approach that? Because just to open it up and say anybody who wants to come in and talk about any of these policy issues is likely to be so unstructured that it's not gonna add value to anything.
understood. I don't think everything rises to that level.
Right.
I'm trying to say that without pointing to specific issues, but let me just give you an example. Item number 32,
Right.
which relates to setting a time limit or other rules addressing the tribal contact land and trust issue. I was speaking in sort of in vague vagaries regarding that particular issue. That is one that, because it impacts an entire region,
Right.
impacts potential number of different applicants, that I think that might rise to a level where we would want further input. You heard from the consultants that some of the policy issues that we are going to be deciding upon might actually appear in regulations, and some of them might just be policy guidelines.
Right.
If they're in regulations, then there might be a whole nother public process that's
Right.
involved where
There will
people
be,
will
yeah.
be heard from.
Right.
So if you take all of those that might appear in regulations and they are put under the regulatory box, they're already getting additional process. So maybe we wouldn't need to specifically specify any of those for additional input from us. But if there's an issue that might not necessarily be in a regulation, but we make a legal determination or others that could impact the whole region, such as the one I discussed, perhaps that would require some additional process by the commission.
Yeah, I hear you. And I agree with that. The only thing I think we need, and I'm sure we will be, we need to keep in mind as we move forward is that we've got to frame the issue in a way that is susceptible to a reasoned presentation on a target issue rather than some broad, open-ended thing that really isn't going to help those who want to present something to us
Correct.
figure out what we're interested in, and isn't going to help us figure out what value we're trying to obtain from the public hearing process. But if we frame the issues correctly and do those kinds of things that affect the region, perhaps it's a good idea.
I share that, that view and concern relative to the need for structuring. Perhaps we could, like we attempted to do in this document, call out those particular questions, like the one you just mentioned, that would merit more of a process, and differentiate that from the rest of them that could allow us to move in this particular setting, answering and issuing policy statements or regulation, whatever the case may be. Because if we treat all of them in the same capacity, we might get confusion for the general population.
Well, there's also a time issue. We've set aside 3 weeks, and then I think we gave ourselves 1 week, and then we gave ourselves a full week of public hearings where we were going to be trying to go through all these issues and discuss them and resolve them. So there's not a lot of extra time, but maybe what we ought to do, I'm sort of having the same, I'm rethinking a little bit from when you and I talked, and sort of coming down where Commissioner McHugh is, what really would be the substantive value add? Something like the travel situation, I think, is such a big one that I think I agree, and I'm sure there may be others that are that big. But maybe what we ought to do is say that we're willing to expand, to have a hearing process on some of these, a public hearing on some of these, and each of us can recommend which ones we think maybe rise to that level, and invite the public to say so also. You know, if a public feels like, if a commentator who's going to submit in writing wants to propose why they feel it needs to be public hearing as well, then we'll entertain that. Because we're not going to have a lot of time to do that before we get to our decision week.
Right, I guess that was going to be my recommendation. As we get to the decision week, it'll be clear from the narratives that each of the commissioner provides what's framing the question, and it'll probably be a little bit more clear what will eventually find its way into regulation, so you have these other processes. But then what you're saying is that the commission may be in a situation between now and the first or second week of December where it may need to act on something that would necessarily be involved in the policy questions. If that is the case, my recommendation would be to take into account the need for public input if anything comes up between now and that period.
Right.
But by the time that we start going over all these questions, the second week of December, it'll be pretty clear what input we have from the outside world and what will find its way into a regulation or other policy where additional process may or may not be necessary.
Right.
You know, in that regard, we could also think about, and it might be more productive to think about moving forward with that decision week, and we will be able to resolve a lot of these policy issues with the comments we receive, plus our deliberation during that week, and use that week as an opportunity to surface questions that we really do need a more public input on, and use that process also to refine the questions that we're interested in. That way we could go forward with the regulations, we're not talking about a long period, go forward with the regulations that support the policies we're able to decide without a public hearing, recognizing that at the end, everybody get a chance to talk about that. And then have a period where we have a few public hearings and have them come right in behind, that regulatory process coming right in behind what we've done before. That might be the best, a way to think about it.
Well, is there any reason not to, well, I think that's right, and when we're talking in the second week of December about these, we may discover that we don't have enough data and we'll want to have a public hearing. That's clearly a sort of a fail-safe system. But I don't think there's any harm with having a commissioner or the public suggest it also. So why don't we do both?
Yeah.
Let's say that we're open to the need for public hearings above and beyond the comment. If a commissioner feels a topic, one of his or her topic rises to that level, let's put it on the table. If a participant feels it rises to that level, they can put it on the table in their written comments, and we'll take it under advisement. But we will be mindful that a lot of these will have a public hearing at the stage of the regulations process anyway. That may or may not be a solution, because some of this we've been to get decisions earlier, but we will be mindful of that point. Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other issues that are surfacing, anything anybody else wants to talk about in terms of the key questions?
I wanted to talk about looking at the number one that I have. I've got one number one, it's question number 5. And it ties into question number 4. And also ties into outreach to communities through the ombudsman. And so I was thinking about the desirability of packaging across pockets, questions that ought to really be run through our ombudsman, or coordinated with our ombudsman, so that we go to the communities to solicit information from them with a package of things coming from a single source, rather than those of us.
There's a seat over here if okay, sorry.
Rather than have individual commissioners reaching out to the same people on a variety of times. And it seems to me a little bit of coordination there would be worthwhile. So I guess I put a period at the end of that.
But so what was that? What was the operational thrust of that?
That at least, that we ought to go through this, this chart that we've now got, and see if there are cross-pocket questions that ought to be packaged together and
Oh, I see, okay.
from which we solicit information from cities and towns and others through a single source. And I use as an example question 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
They are different parts of the licensing process, but they are going to require some input from cities and towns. They logically flow, and we ought to package them through our ombudsman to get the information, some of the information we need to answer.
Well, I've gone through mine, and John and I have agreed on which ones he's going to sort of take the lead on. Maybe other commissioners ought to do the same thing, and so that he can then pull them all together, that he knows the ones he's working on.
Sure, that's a way to do it, or we could start from the other direction and have John go through these and take a look at them and see which ones fit together, and
That makes more sense.
which ones, I think that's more efficient, quite frankly. And say these questions all relate to one another, and these are the people we need to get information from. We can supply our thoughts to you, John, on that, but then pull together a mechanism for reaching out once to the people in various towns with 3 or 4 or 5 questions, whatever it is, so that we don't all come at them from different directions.
Does that work for you? Okay. Okay, anything else on key policy questions? Any other problems or issues or? Okay. Any other issues under project work plan?
No, not for me.
Okay. Then we're on to administration, and we'll ask Director Eileen Lovsky to come back. If there's anything on your list to talk about.
Yeah, I did want to say the project management chart is something that we are going to start using within the agency, and my intention is we would update it on Mondays and do our best to have an updated version here for Tuesday, because we had a Monday holiday. We're sort of out of sync with that, but I do feel that it will never be a perfect document, but it is close enough now that we can be using it on a regular basis to move on. And with that being said, we'll all have to be mindful as we go through items here at this meeting or within our day-to-day operations, that when we have date-significant issues, that information be communicated to me at the earliest opportunity so we can get that information onto the schedule and keep moving forwards.
It'll give us a focus on our update, our scheduling meetings, to just sort of run through at the beginning of Monday morning and see what's on the griddle, what's changed, what new things are going on, what critical path items are right in front of us, and so forth. So I think that'll be great.
Right.
And we'll have continue to have the most recent version of this in the shared drive so that everybody
Yes.
can access it all the time. Yeah, good.
And the next, the strategic plan, I wanted to put that back onto the agenda because I think that with all the work that's been going on with the scope of licensing, that the strategic plan sort of took a backseat and we never got to a place where we formally approved it. Like the scheduling document, it will never be perfect. It's a plan. As our consultants move into sort of the second phase of what they're working on with the regulations and all, I'd like to be able to free them up from any further work at the earliest possibility on the strategic plan. And I just wasn't sure what we needed to do to approve it. I know that there have been comments made, and I believe a subsequent edition had been sent back to the commission, and wanted to make sure that if there were any further discussion that had to be had in order to approve it, that we looked at that now. Maybe the discussion won't happen right now, but happen next week, and then could do the finalization of the plan the week after Thanksgiving. So.
I went over it again on the weekend, and I think there are any number of issues, but they're not issues that the plan failed to address our concerns. They're issues that we need to be remembered to go to the plan when the time comes, because there's a whole host of suggestions about issues we should address as the time comes. In fact, it's almost something that we could put on, like there's a whole bunch of licensing considerations and so forth that we could almost put them on the Gantt chart, on the project management chart. And I was reminded of two or three things. One of the big ones, I think, is legislative fixes. I think that maybe I should take the lead in thinking that through, how many, if any, of those things do we want to go after. And there are any number of things I think everybody would be reminded about to look at here. But having said that, I think they've done the job. I mean, I think we have our strategic plan. It's a great guideline to where we're going. We need our ED to take charge of it, so we're not doing it. But I don't see any reason not to formally accept it at this point. I'm happy to wait if somebody wants to, but from my review of it, there's no need to do that.
My only hesitation about doing it right now is that I think there are a couple of important policy issues with respect to the organization that we really ought to address sooner than later. And I don't want to say I hold the plan hostage, approval of the plan hostage to consideration of those issues, but we've talked about them. The two in particular are, where do we put in the overall hierarchy the person who's responsible for problem gaming? And the second is a debate we've continued to have as to what we're going to do about the kinds of IT people we need to have in the organization and where do they fit in the organization. And that's, I think, not a question of whether the person responsible for turning the switches on the computers reports to the Director of Administration or the Director of Enforcement, but where do we get the policy maker, or what kind of a person do we want as a policy maker and IT czar, given the central role that IT is going to play in our future as we
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's a consideration that's so plastic that we don't have to resolve it now, but my concern is that unless we do address it, it is going to be one of these things that's always on the shelf, and we're going to build around it. and find that we have built something that really doesn't work the way it should. So that's, I mean, it's a big document,
Yeah.
it's well thought out, it's well done. Those are, for me, a couple of loose ends.
And I think that the whole table of organization has to be a living, breathing document. I'm not at all convinced that the numbers they have recommended, for example, of staffing in the casinos are appropriate. I don't think we have enough information to make those decisions yet. Scope, size of the facilities, all of those things are yet to be determined, which for me means that those numbers are not real. They have suggested numbers, for example, gaming agents, troopers, and it's too soon. And so I don't look at that as a finished document when it comes to those recommendations, which kind of builds on your
I think
point.
that there's a distinction. This is not meant to answer all the questions. It's meant to give us a time frame and lay out all the things that we're gonna have to do, and to raise places where there are big decisions. I mean, you all have mentioned two, and there are a number of others. But we sort of gotta get this, we gotta get this behind us. We need to accept this work product, which is a part of the first phase of their contract. That doesn't mean it's over. That means we just keep working on this. And if it's time to put the CIO question on the table, then we should do that. But I don't think that has anything to do with whether we accept the plan or not.
Right, I just didn't want someone to think because we accepted it, we believe that all of that is accurate and that's what will be.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think the consultants would agree with that also.
Does it make sense to accept the plan, but ask for the consultants to provide one to us that has the table of organization separate, and that the commission could say that they accept the strategic plan with the exception, acknowledging that we're not in a place to approve a table of organization at this point?
But they haven't proposed a specific table. I mean, they've got varieties of,
Right.
they've got different charts for different things, and they specifically raised the issue that Commissioner McHugh just talked about. If we were to accept this, we're not accepting a specific table of organization. We're accepting a proposed table of organization with a bunch of open issues that they raise. I mean, it's sort of a formality raising that. What I'm not suggesting is that if we in any way say that somehow, okay, this is signed, sealed, and delivered, it's done, it's over, forget about it, now nothing else to talk about.
No.
But it is a work product in our first phase of the contract that we do need to accept at some point, and I don't think there's any point, I don't see anything really else here to iterate on. I see it's time for us to begin to pick up the questions they've raised and start to answer them.
And it's as far as I'm concerned, it's a continuum. I mean, so when is something so amorphous that it's not helpful, and when is something resolved enough that even though it has questions, it is helpful? And this falls on that end of the continuum. Nonetheless, there are these, in my mind, big questions, and I'm concerned that unless we undertake an effort to answer them now in the context of adopting this, or figure out a process and a timeline for answering them, we are going to go down the road just because we're busy and a lot of things are going on, and build something around, build a structure that doesn't address these questions. So,
Would it be helpful if for any number of key questions, we try to frame answers around alternatives? I mean, you've spoken about the alternatives we may face. Put some specificity as to, it's not just an open-ended question, but really we have these, however many, 2 or 3 specific alternatives. I'm just speculating as a way to, move forward with both intentions.
I mean, to me, that's a step in the direction of beginning to address the issues. And as I said, I think there are things like some of the ones you've mentioned and others that probably ought to get put on the chart that says it's, if by this date, we got to get the CIO topic on the table. By this date, we've got to have the numbers of troopers and who's going to be doing what in the IEB on the table, et cetera. Although a lot of those dates are already in here. But it's a practical matter. I think we're ready to get this behind us and just keep working with it. and that process, what you're talking about is, you know, we can, when we're starting to tee up the CIO options, we'll put those, you know, we can get to putting several options on the table and try to work them through. I mean, I sort of see it as non-controversial. We need to close this phase of the contract. And unless there were things where we felt they had not yet done their job in providing options or in addressing the issues that we that we raised in the first draft, and they certainly addressed mine in this draft, I think it's ready to move on. Somebody want to move or not move, or?
Well, I see both points. I agree with your characterization of from a contractual standpoint, we need to accept the work product, and it becomes a living document, and we'll recognize that. So.
Well, what's the alternative? What's?
We've had a good discussion of this. I'm prepared to move on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you want to move
Sure.
that?
So move that we accept the latest draft of the strategic plan as presented to this commission,
And tee up the issues,
And tee up
the
all
unresolved
issues.
issues for addressing in the appropriate schedule.
yes.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. I don't know if there's anything else that we have to do technically with the consultants on this, but, okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. But it is important, and I was reminded as I went through this, there's a ton of things, issues that are raised here, and we don't want to forget about them. So I think, you know, putting maybe one of our new staff persons or you or somebody could put put these key points on the chart.
Yeah, a number of them are. I think that part of what we need to start doing is drilling down. I mean, I think acceptance of the strategic plan is probably on the chart, but going to the table of organization, reviewing this, and I've sort of put a note here, make sure that we have a milestone that by the end of the first quarter of the next year that those things have been dealt with. But you're right, getting down at a deeper level on the chart is going to be critical, and what I hope we will be able to start accomplishing on our Monday meetings. Personnel searches, we do have 2 new employees that are starting today, and I am continuing.
Say who they are.
Yes, Todd Grossman, who is our staff attorney, and Ellen Cassidy, who is going to be executive assistant to Commissioner Stebbins and Commissioner Cameron. So
Great.
we're thrilled to have them on board.
Welcome, everybody.
And I am continuing the search for the business analyst, generalist, and well into that process, and hope to have someone starting perhaps by the first of the year for that position. And I'll turn over the employee manual to Commissioner Zinni.
I've included in the packet chapters, the latest draft of chapters 1 and 3 of the employee manual. They are not being submitted for a vote. They are only being submitted for consideration. The idea behind this is that we do these, we include these, however many chapters are ready for consideration on a particular meeting like today. Go through any questions, issues that may merit further research or further consideration for hopefully a subsequent meeting approval. So I am now submitting chapters 1 and 3 in that spirit. I can take any questions, or we can have any discussion relative to anything here, with the intention of coming back next week or the next meeting to approve these 2 chapters, and then we could do that on a rolling basis for the remaining 3 or 4 chapters.
Somebody else? Anybody want to start with comments?
I don't have any comments at this point. I may have some that I'll send to you during the week, but I've had a chance to look at this and comment on it during the initial process. I think we all have had one shot at it.
On, Commissioner? did you-
Yeah, no, I mean, the bulk of it is in the first section. It looks like, first of all, I got to compliment commissioners in here because I feel the mission and the purpose is, that's laid out for future employees of the commission, I thought was encouraging. It kind of keeps to our mission statement. I had a question, though. It looks like page 11, where it talks about internal candidates for positions as they arise. Is, as you've done with others, you've kind of cut and paste and pulled from best practices of other agencies, but the piece about, you know, an employee who's an internal candidate may not be able to compete for a position based on they've had a written warning or something within the last 6 months. Is that pulled from other materials, or is that something that we?
We were deliberate. Not particularly.
I mean, it's commendable. I want to keep it in. I was
Yeah.
just wondering if that's a similar practice in other agencies.
Yes, it is a similar practice in other agencies.
Did you have any, Commissioner Cameron?
Yeah, again, I'm always impressed with Commissioner Zuniga's work. It's very well done, easy to read, and I know from past experience that a lot of handbooks are not all that easy to, they're not in a logical order necessarily, so I'm impressed reading through the materials.
I had a couple of things. On page 4 of chapter 1, it says provisions for handbook have been developed at discretion of the commission and except for the policy of employment at will may be amended or canceled at any time. Why is that singled out? We've been talking about the fact that we could change that.
This, I believe, was an edit after the August 14 meeting. We could strike that, I suppose. The way I try to address the earlier issue around employment at will was, I believe, in the introduction.
I think you did refer to it other places, but it's just, here it says.
Maybe left over.
Here it
Yes.
says it can't be changed, which I don't think we mean.
That's correct, that's
Yeah,
correct.
okay.
Yes.
And then on page 11, it talks about letters of recommendation, and I believe that letters of recommendation can only be looked at and used. Commissioner McHugh and I talked about this at the finalist stage.
Well, after people have been found qualified is what the statute language is.
After they've been found qualified. Oh, okay, not the finalist stage. Okay. Well, apparently there's relatively new legislation that specs out when you can use the letters of recommendation, and I wasn't familiar with it, and even though apparently it came out of our report. So maybe that's worth looking at. You know, is there a legislative directive about when letters of recommendation can be used in the process?
My belief, but I will do more research on this. My belief is that the key consideration here was that the recommendations must be done in writing.
Yeah,
No
you've got
such
that
thing
there,
as,
right,
yeah.
right.
But the statute goes on to say that they can't be considered until the applicant has been found qualified for the position. And there are a couple of other things in the statute. I'll send you the citation, you can take a look.
And that was to remedy, this grew out of the probation scandal and
Yes.
so forth, and so it's
Yes.
there for conscious purposes
Okay.
to perfect the system, so it's probably worth, since it was a legislative remedy, it's probably worth putting in there. On page 13, access to sensitive information is limited to the head of the enforcement division. Does that mean the hiring manager who's doing the hiring can't?
No, this was actually updated recently on chapter 2, which was one, what page was that again, Mr. Chairman?
Page 13, 1.6, background checks, third paragraph, last sentence.
Yeah, we may need to strike that.
Yeah, okay. You know, this is my normal resistance to bureaucracy, but on page 15, it says overnight stays and out-of-state travel require prior approval from the chief financial officer. I would think your department director would be plenty. you know, you don't need to go to the CFO to, page 15. Just that little hanging end of a sentence of chapter 1.
Each page.
Last page of chapter 1.
Yes, it's page 14. You may have a different version.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Okay. Just, I think.
Department head.
Department director, yeah.
Yep.
And this is just a matter of definition. I thought I saw in the email that came out during the snowstorm that we were not essential employees. Am I remembering that wrong?
We are not.
We
But
are
in the
not.
future, commission employees assigned to casinos or to gaming establishments are key employees as per the
Oh, I
statute.
see. Okay, got it. You got that right.
So,
Okay, good. Thank you.
Gotta keep the casino going.
Same thing on page, I don't know, it's not paginated, but on 3.3.3, temporary alternate work schedules or telecommuting requirements require approval of the ED. I think that would be a department director too. Department director.
Can I add with, in conjunction with the Director of Human Resources? Because sometimes you can get policies from implementation of policies from department to department out of whack.
Yeah. That was it for me. So we're not voting?
We're not voting
Okay,
on that,
all right.
but I can incorporate these changes or any others in between now and the next time.
Okay, great. Moving along quickly to the racing division, Director Nuremberger. You can introduce yourself and your team.
Well, this is Jennifer Dernberger, Director of Racing. Good afternoon, Commission. This is Danielle Holmes, who's currently signed on as a legal assistant. But this would be a good time to get her in front of you this
Great.
afternoon. I think the first thing that we wanted to talk about was the licensing for live racing for the racetracks for 2013.
Director, I'll give an overview, and then we'll have you fill in the details. How does that work?
I think that sounds great.
Okay. So an application process is required every year. The requirements for the application to conduct live racing set forth in the general laws of Chapter 128A, Section 2. Applications for the 2013 racing meets and required fees were received from Our Way Realty, Plain Ridge Racecourse, and Sterling Suffolk Downs prior to October 1st, the statutory deadline. Duly noticed public hearings were held in Boston and Plainville respectively on October 18th, 2012. No objections were heard to the application process, and supplemental information was requested at that time and provided by both tracks. This is a matter the Commission must approve before the 15th, so we will vote on this matter today. But before we do that, I'd like Dr. Dernberger to give us a little more detail about the required supplemental material and what was submitted.
Thank you, Commissioner. The application process may or may not have been reviewed in the recent past, and so I thought that going forward, what we might want to do is include sort of policy recommendations in some of the recommendations that the Legislative Review Group, the one that's doing the Section 104 review, may be making. And the reason for this is that there's just a couple of things that we didn't quite know how to look at. For example, financial suitability is in the statute. It's one of the things that the Commission must require, and you really haven't been given any parameters or guidelines for doing that. So I thought that perhaps the best way to do this going forward is, as part of this legislative review, looking at chapters 128A and 128C, bringing some policy issues forward for future years' applications, and maybe some recommendations for some changes going forward. We did have a clarification on one application and an amendment on the other application. We had a very minor amendment on the Suffolk Downs application, and that was, let's see here, question 8, which was intended hours for live racing. We have in 128A Section 2, Sub 5, there's statutory language that running horse racing cannot be conducted later than 7 o'clock p.m. And the application had 8 o'clock p.m. in there. Suffolk has just submitted a request for amendment to change that until 7 p.m., so it's in conformity. So we have that amendment. And then we had a clarification of some language in the Plain Ridge application. Question 26, which was how many races they intended to run per day. They just clarified that they intended to run 9 to 12 races on average. And I have no problem with either of those, either the clarification or the amendment.
Are those the changes that were requested and materials that were submitted?
The supplemental materials that we requested, one of them was in response to a question from Commissioner McHugh regarding insurance coverage. And so we did request both tracks to provide copies of their insurance coverage for either jockeys or drivers respectively. And so we did distribute those materials to the commission. We had there was a question about a financial matter, a note, there was an extension of a note.
Excuse me, Director,
Yes.
could you speak a little louder? I think some of the folks in the back are straining to hear you.
Certainly. I
Thank
can
you.
do that. I'm from New York. I can talk loud.
Thank you.
So we had a supplemental information requested regarding insurance coverage for jockeys and drivers from the respective tracks. We did receive those and distribute them to the commissions. We had a clarification on a note. Let's see, that was on the Plain Ridge application, and that was just a mortgage extension. We did receive that. And so all of the supplemental materials that we requested were submitted and reviewed.
Questions, issues?
I just wanted to make the point that this application, and I think Dr. Dernberger alluded to this, is something that's been in place for a long time, and it will be part of the review that's going on for best practices in racing. So there may be some changes for next year's application. We made minor changes this year. But again, this will all be part of the review to implement best practices for next year.
And I think that what we will do as part of the legislative review is put some policy issues before you all to discuss. We're not ready to do that today, but just some things that came up during the process. And so you can get your minds wrapped around that and have some deliberation on how to proceed just from a policy standpoint.
Others?
Yeah, as we are doing this review of Chapter 128A and C in order to provide recommendations for any changes, I suppose. I'm intrigued by the fact that the statute had a particular time after which races could not take place. Is that, I'm just curious, some legacy, or is that a safety issue? What do other jurisdictions have in these
It's
cases?
actually multifactorial, and with the running horse, part of it has to do just even with the lights that you have, because then you get into community abatement if you have lights for racing. But there's flexibility there. So in the event of, say, a weather-related delay or some other, like a power failure where there was a delay and maybe that last race post time was going to be after 7 o'clock, they can still, give us a call, give the director of racing a call, and then in consultation with the commission, we can approve an extension for that day. So there is some place around that. But the answer to your question is yes, it is historical, and there's multiple reasons behind it. Not all of which I'm familiar in the Commonwealth, but certainly in other jurisdictions.
Right, but it occurs to me that as part of this process that we have now, it may be the best time for us to think about those.
Yes, and
The
racing has
genesis of
occurred
this.
here at different times too. There used to be racing in the wintertime. The running horses would go in the wintertime, and now they don't. And so in terms of how that time was picked, we can certainly get to the bottom of that.
Right.
Commissioner Stevens, anything?
No, I had one question which you allude to in the memo with respect to, it sounds like a very old provision, but I was was interested in the history of the 85% employment rule for a licensee. 85% of the employees have to come from or have residency in Massachusetts. I was just curious about the history of that, and do our licensees face any challenges in kind of meeting that obligation?
So this section, this is in General Laws, Chapter 128A, Section 10. And that section, as I'm reading it, is only in effect until July of 2014.
Okay.
But historically, no, we are trying to figure out how in the past, if that's been enforced or looked at, or what proof has been requested of the racetracks. But I don't have any, I'm not in receipt of any materials from that from the previous year.
But that's a legislative mandate, so.
Yes, it is.
That's something you're going to be looking
So
into.
that'll be a
right?
policy
Yeah.
issue, yeah.
I had one concern, and this is marginally informed, but I think it's worth putting it out there. You talked about the financial ability, and the clear, when I was looking at the background material, the submitted materials, what was clear was that several couple of these facilities were, by anybody's measure, bankrupt, basically. They're being kept alive by funders, apparently, probably in anticipation of the possibility of a gaming license. If the gaming license doesn't materialize, what will be the incentive for the funders to keep these things going even in midstream? And I wonder whether it's worth thinking about some kind, and as I say, this is a marginally informed view, but I can imagine that if a decision gets made, one of these facilities that does not have the operating revenue to pay its bills does not get selected, that the funders are going to say, see you around, you know, we've done our thing here. And does the Commonwealth need some kind of something or other, some kind of a guarantee of a bond or something that assures that the racing folks and won't get left in the lurch without some kind of a careful phase down if that eventuality would occur? Because it seems to me they don't have the financial ability to operate unless their funders continue to pump in subsidies. So do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it's something that the commission needs to look at very carefully going forward.
Yeah.
And I think that just falls right in with the policy discussions that I anticipate we'll be having over what we call the dark season when there's not live racing.
Okay, because it would need to be tied to the beginning. I mean, if again, I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but if we are going to grant a license for a period which will run through the possible period in which licensing decisions will be made for gaming licenses, maybe we should have some kind of a conditional licensing that we can, or maybe we can amend it without that, but should we, because we might want to amend it to somehow or other assure the operation of the facilities or the phase down of the facilities or the payment of outstanding bills or whatever. So I don't know whether we can amend a license later on or whether we should make the license conditional on that, because this is a unique year in the life of some of these facilities because of the impending gaming decisions.
I just want to make a small point of clarification. The tracks do provide a bond that you were alluding to currently. We may think of it, or some of us may think of it as insufficient or sufficient. That's another matter. But there is, if you will, a backstop to the issue that you raise.
So that maybe it's covered. Maybe what I'm saying is covered.
Well, it is covered up to a point because the bond is only for a certain amount. You know, the issue could be larger than that, and the issue you raise is still relevant, but it's not zero.
Right.
Is my point.
Right.
Well, and I think we did ask specific questions during the hearings about the financial situation, and we were assured that certainly their financial, the investors have, they made assurances to us, the track owners and operators, that they do have money to carry on for next racing season, that their investors are committed to next racing season, and that is a commitment that's separate and apart from a gaming license.
Well, maybe this is covered, I don't know, but I think it's important enough. This is, as I say, this isn't just any year in the life of the racing industry in Massachusetts. It's a very, very big year. And we need to think a little bit about protecting against the downside maybe more rigorously than we have before. If it's all covered, fine. But I think it's worth, in your dark period, taking a look at that, thinking, your sentence here says, there have been situations where operators have filed for bankruptcy during a live racing meeting, creating hardship for racing participants of all varieties. And we don't want that to happen. And we don't want
I don't
to
think
have
anyone
failed
wants
to
that.
think about it. And if it's under control, fine, but if it isn't, somebody needs to look at it with a real hard nose and a sharp pencil to make sure that we're covered in that kind of an eventuality. Okay?
Okay.
Anything else? Okay?
Okay, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the applications for the two racetracks, and that's Plain Ridge Racecourse and Suffolk Downs. At this time, I'd like to make the motion that we do approve these licenses for next year.
Second? And my only discussion would be to make sure that we haven't, by doing that, I don't know enough about this, that we haven't locked ourselves into something that we can't amend. Maybe some of you can answer. Or subject to some kind of a condition that gives us the ability to make sure we're covered in the eventuality of something going bad. I mean, we hope it doesn't happen. It probably won't happen, but it does happen. And I just think we need to have thought about it. And I wouldn't want to approve the license without the ability, ex post facto, to look into that and make sure we're covered.
We need to approve by the 15th statutorily. I am convinced that that in addition to the bond, we do have assurances, and there has not been a problem in the last several years. The investors have continued to support the racing operations. And at this point, I don't think we should consider not approving the license, where we do have those assurances and we have a past history of the tracks meeting their obligations.
Well, I'm not suggesting not to not approve it. I'm just suggesting not to approve it in a way that doesn't enable us to address this issue. I mean, a promise of good faith, the people who run these facilities are horsemen. I know they're not going to cause any trouble if they can avoid it. But I don't know whether the people who provide the money are horsemen. And I don't know how they feel. I mean, they're business people. Why are they going to put bad money after good, or good money after bad, if they don't have to? And as I say, maybe there's somebody in the room that knows whether or not the bond is big enough. Maybe I'm just talking about something which is irrelevant here. But
The bond is $100,000.
I would say that probably doesn't do the job, but I don't know very much about it. Is there any reason, Commissioner McHugh, do you have an opinion on this? Is there any reason? Is there a way to approve the licenses, reserving the right to look into this issue and see whether there's anything?
I haven't researched that issue, Mr. Chairman. I have no opinion on that. I do know that the notes in the Plain Ridge instance were extended to 2014, so they're not due until 2014.
But I
That
think
doesn't prevent a declaration of bankruptcy.
Well, and they're demand notes.
No, they're well.
I'm not sure.
But they're not. I'm not sure they are.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Well, I don't think this is a trivial. If everybody disagrees with me, please say so. But it doesn't seem to me to be a trivial issue. I mean, it's, and I've seen we would not be being responsible to not think this through. If today is what? Is this the last meeting before the 15th?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair.
Well,
I think context here is important, which is the fact that these it's well understood and known that these operators are going to be competing for a gaming license, which in my view, is a very strong financial incentive for the partners to continue those
Oh,
operations.
they're not gonna go anywhere until the game, I'm talking about after the gaming decision is made.
Right.
But this is a one-year license.
This is a one-year license, right?
Right, the decision might get made in the middle of that year. When is the racing season, from when to when next year?
April to
s-
September.
Mid-April until late November is the bookends.
So worst case, we could not make a decision until the end of November.
Yeah, but to an extent, you could have some local decisions being made before our licensing application process.
Yeah, if a referendum failed, for example. Right.
Director Durenberg, I mean, with respect to obligations that the tracks have to make for mutual betting, all the other things where the races are being covered, being watched by other tracks and other betting venues, is there a commitment from that perspective to have the full racing season?
Well, that's a business decision with each of those, like with vendors, for example,
Right.
that you're talking about, and is that what you're asking?
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
asking you-
typically racing continues during that period,
Right.
and so then,
But, I mean, I guess my question is, if there are contracts and relationships between tracks which will broadcast, the races from Massachusetts, is there a contract that essentially binds them, a business relationship, through to the end of the season?
I actually don't know the answer to that, I apologize.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that you've raised an issue that we can't resolve today. We simply don't have the information. So the alternative to either approving it today or disapproving it today is to postpone the approval and have another meeting on Thursday, and use those 2 days to get the additional information that we need to make a decision. We can post that meeting by
4 o'clock.
by 4 o'clock. And we can have the meeting at 4 o'clock on Thursday. And-
Well, is there any reason,
The only other thing that I can think of is to issue a conditional license, and quite frankly, I haven't done the research to know whether we can issue a conditional license or not, whether it has to be up or down.
Nor have I, and I apologize.
Yeah.
well, there's
So,
no reason.
there's no apologies.
Can we get, is there any reason not to let people from the floor speak up if they have something to say?
You
On
can
this?
Run the meeting in any way you want,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm gonna say it's all right if anybody's got anything constructive to add here, so I see it.
Would this be covered under the legislation as live entertainment, where you would have some abilities under the legislation to remediate people who were damaged by casinos who have live entertainment? Would the horse racing industry fall under that provision, which gives you some authority in looking at people who are damaged, which would allow you now to move this and deal with that as a separate issue down the line? There is provisions in the.
Yeah, I don't think that would, I don't think that, let's say a referendum failed in August or July or even June possibly. I don't think that would give us the authority to make sure that a facility doesn't shut down because it's losing, $1 million a month or whatever the money is, whatever the losses are.
Well, this is also a specific licensing scheme that's separate and apart from the overall gaming. And I think the construction of it and the operation of it is independent of it's allied with, but it's independent of the broader gaming legislation. So it really is a standalone piece. So,
I know the motion has been made and seconded, is that correct? I want to continue adding comments that I believe the alternative, besides the third alternative of another meeting, the alternative of not approving the application is way more disruptive than accepting it.
What happens if we turn it down now and take it up on Tuesday? Never mind, we can certainly do it on Thursday, which is one solution, but what about if we take it up on Tuesday?
Isn't the deadline November 15th?
That's in the
Is that a
statute.
statutory
That's in the
deadline?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but what happens if you don't make it? I know we looked into others, and then if these dates are advisory, and if you don't if there's no penalty, then you can,
That's right. Some dates are advisory and directory and not essential. And one can, I don't know what the answer to that is, though, Mr. Chairman.
well, is there any remedy, is there anything that happens if we don't? Like, are they granted if we don't have a vote? It's not an automatic granting if we don't have the vote.
Yeah, the vote is for approval or disapproval, so.
Right. Well, we can do that. We can vote or disapprove or disapprove. Well, let's sort of take the temperature here, you know, does anybody else think that this is an issue? You seem to think it's not, you'd rather go ahead and not.
I'll be voting for the yes, for the approval of the license.
Commissioner?
I would vote for approval of the license unless there's any interest in scheduling a meeting on the 15th so we meet the statutory deadline.
Yeah.
Of course, I think that the tracks have demonstrated good faith in everything we have requested to date, and in past years, they've done that, and I am inclined to vote yes also.
Yeah. Just for the record, there's not an aspersions on the people who run the tracks, you know. I've been a businessman, I've been an entrepreneur, I've been not making my projections, and I've had investors cut me loose without so much as a blink of an eye. So this is not about the people that we've been dealing with. Well, it sounds like, so how about if we do it with the condition that we can pursue this issue, and if it turns out we don't have that right, we don't have that right. But we at least give ourselves that option if we do have the right. So we would amend the motion to make it conditional upon being able to address the issue of the certainty of operation, assuring the certainty of operation. And if for some reason or other we don't have the right to do that, then we will have just.
How do we,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
what are we looking for to have that assurance?
We're looking for whatever it would take to how much money is it going to require to continue the racing year and to phase down operations in the event of a termination of the facility in a way that's consistent with the public interest, so that we don't have what Deputy Director Dernberger refers to here. And if that's $500,000, then we would need to make sure that there's $500,000 available in the event of a freak circumstances like that. And if it's $100,000 and the bond already does the trick, then this was all a waste of time.
But if we have that right, don't we have the authority to exercise it at any time in the future? Whereas if we don't, we don't.
I just don't know enough about it, you know. I don't know what flexibility there is if we've approved the license. So I don't see the downside to approving it with that contingent and contingency. And if for some reason we can't act on that contingency, then we've just approved it. Is that all right?
So we need to amend the motion?
Yeah, so we would need to amend the motion. Anybody want to amend the motion? I'm not sure.
Satisfied with the motion
Chair
that's made.
can amend. Well, if nobody else is sold on this as a problem, then I'm not going to beat a dead horse, so to speak. Sorry about that. All right, so anything else? Anybody else have comments? So the motion is to approve the licenses as proposed. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion passes. Okay, what's next?
Next is just a brief update on the Section 104 legislative review, which is the mandate to the commission to review the parimutuel and simulcast laws for efficacy and need to change. And I've brought Ms. Danielle Holmes with me today.
So David, Mari, and I have prepared a summary of the issues that David addressed last week at the meeting, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. And today we started reviewing 128A and 128C.
I think David briefed the commission last week just sort of on some overview issues, some bigger policy issues that we're going to be bringing to your attention. We have a summary report that's being finalized right now by David as we speak, and so we will be putting that before you in the near future, and doing the same with these 128A and 128C.
I don't know what 128A and C means, that doesn't mean anything to me,
The
but.
pari-mutuel statute and the simulcast wagering statute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which included in those are the process for applying for a license for live racing dates.
Right, okay. And there was that big issue that came up, even almost before you got here, which was the claim about whether or not even simulcast dog racing was permitted under the law, right? That's one of the, I don't know where that fits in your review, but that's one of the things you're looking at.
Yep,
right?
David is preparing an opinion on that.
Right, okay, great.
As part of the memo from Dave, I suppose the past discussion would be important to include as to what would it take.
Yep, absolutely.
In terms of bond size or what may be a winding down of operations. If nothing else, for that review of 128A.
Right. Okay, great. Next.
In your packet is a proposed table of organization for the racing side of the Gaming Commission, with the caveat, of course, that, as you discussed earlier, in, let's see, what section was it? In the administrative section, that there are some shared staff issues that have not been resolved yet, and that we'll have to, be working. It's a living, breathing document, as you said. But before you is sort of the operations table of organization. To the left, if you find there's a group of 3, operations manager, and then the field licensing group and field auditing group. And that would basically be your year-round field operations employees. In the middle, this executive assistant, which we know initially will be shared staff with racing and gaming, the senior financial analyst, and then the auditor administrator and administrative coordinator. Those are sort of your year-round office positions. And to your right, with the stewards, judges, and veterinary group, that's sort of your seasonal field operations. We have, if I could draw your attention to 2 key positions here, and the one on the left is operations manager, which is sort of your field operations manager. This is a new hire. It certainly can be an internal candidate, but it's a new position that we felt was necessary. And senior financial analyst is also a new position that we felt was necessary, particularly because the Racing Commission had been operating without a CPA or a CFO in recent times, and so we really felt it was important to have a substantial financial hire sooner rather than later. It's anticipated that when a CFO is hired by the Gaming Commission, that this person would answer to them as opposed to me. I think the rest of the positions are all fairly equivalent positions to what's currently out there, and we do anticipate that current staff will be applying. And in fact, we'd like to get that process moving fairly quickly here. We anticipate interviews for those field operation positions, especially beginning the week of November 26th. The idea being that way we can get them through the background checks and continue operating, have them there on January 1st, continuing in their positions without any disruption either for us or for them. I think the operations.
These are for people who apply to stay on? These are, okay.
Yep.
Because it's not automatic that they're going to stay on.
It's not.
Right, yeah.
It's
okay.
not at all. Operations manager and senior financial analyst, those positions may stay open a little longer to increase the pool of applicants, since those are new positions. And then we're still working out some details on how to do seasonal hires. And season means a lot of different things. I mean, for example, the veterinary position, probably beginning in March, because there's so much to do in terms of SOPs and operating procedures that we are going through some changes, regulatory changes. So that position is basically March until December. So that's a fairly long season. Somebody that's just working, just assigned to, say, Suffolk, would only be working from January until late October. So we have to work out some things there in terms of human resources, what we mean by seasonal hire.
Can you,
I have a quick question. Can you share with me the senior financial analyst and your plan to have them report directly to the CFO once the CFO is hired, but the administrative coordinator will be reporting directly to the director? Could you just
The
walk me through
administrative
that?
coordinator is basically your supply coordinator, your payroll clerk, and is not quite as involved in the financial side of things as, say, the auditors are. And so I have that person under the senior financial analyst initially, basically as a training-in period for both. If we have new people, if we have one new person, we may be, leaning on the other one in terms of procedures and past practices. But I think that the senior financial analyst will have enough strictly financial duties that they don't need to have an administrative coordinator answering as a direct report.
I had read the same question, sort of, why, so you're sort of thinking of there'll be a centralized CFO operations, and the CFO will have people responsible for the different divisions?
I think when you look at how other commissions that have both gaming and racing underneath them, racing sort of has its own set of books, but ultimately should be answerable to the commission at large. So I think that's my vision of that.
Definitely the commission at large, but the CFO, I don't know, we can talk about this as time unfolds.
Sure. And this is all proposed.
Yeah.
well, this is the same, or similar to the topic that David was updating us on last week, I believe, or a week before that, which is as we overlay racing in the Gaming Act to some degree, there's a nexus to ourselves, to the organizational structure that we have. How much of racing continues to be operating on its own, if you will. I mean, maybe I'm drawing a big leap here, but.
No, I agree with you. I think it's an important piece that the CFO has a good understanding of all the finances throughout the entire commission. I know how much effort went into this table of organization and how many best practices from other jurisdictions were incorporated. This is very different than the TO that is in existence now. And I'm confident, had many, many discussions about this, that it'll provide the answers we need, the information flowing in the right places, and the right overall services to operate racing according to best practices. So I want to commend the director for, it's hard to do this, frankly. It's hard to come out of the structure you're in now. People will be disappointed because their exact job does not exist on this TO. And but I think it's important that we do start to incorporate these best practices immediately.
And I think the other piece of that, thank you, Commissioner, I think the other piece of that is that when the acts of 2008, when greyhound racing was eliminated from the state, I don't know that the table of organization of the Racing Commission has been reviewed since that time when there was year-round racing in the Commonwealth. And the reality of it is there's not anymore. It is a seasonal operation. There's simulcasting going on year-round, but in terms of the oversight of live racing, which requires significant manpower, those needs have changed since the last time the State Racing Commission's table of organization was reviewed.
Right. I had a couple questions. Who manages the lab?
Currently?
The lab?
Currently?
No, in your org chart.
We've put out the RFP.
I know,
for
but
laboratory.
somebody has to be responsible for that relationship.
So the contract manager, I believe, is supposed to be me on that.
So
But they're going to be working, the veterinarians usually have a very close relationship with the lab director, so if there are issues regarding testing, then those two, I guess, would be a dotted line.
Okay. Just, I'm thinking of all this trouble we've seen with labs. So somebody has to be responsible for
Yep.
managing that relationship to make sure, if that's you or if it's the veterinarian.
So
But
Pontiac.
I would say there ought to be on here somewhere,
Okay.
the lab. And the state police relationship, how does that fit in here?
So there is actually in the statute, in 128A, our favorite chapter, Section 8 does require that the commission use a state police detail.
Right.
And so we're not quite sure how that is being funded currently. I know that the overtime police detail, which is the state police detail that's in the test barn and actually drives the samples to the lab, that's been invoiced to the commission. I'm not quite sure who is funding the detail at the track, the day-to-day detail.
But I'm not thinking of the funding, I'm thinking about where on the organization chart.
Okay, and I guess I was looking at this as employees, and you're looking at this as everyone that we have a relationship with, so I'm happy
Yeah.
to amend it
Okay,
and
well,
include
that's
those
fine.
things, yeah.
But that's, the state police, for example, were on the chart that the consultants put together. And there was a sergeant with some troopers, and that sergeant
Okay.
reported to the racing division, I guess, and also to the colonel, I don't know exactly.
Okay.
But it does seem like it would be useful to get all the different functions
No
on the
problem.
chart.
Be happy to get that for you.
Okay.
And the sergeant from the state police has been invited to participate in the working group, so that if there are changes that will involve the state police with regard to best practices, they will be one of the stakeholders and have participation.
How does that relationship work? Does that sergeant report to the director now? Or will that person report to the director, or will that person report to the colonel, or both, or?
Well, whenever you're assigned somewhere outside of the state police, you wear two hats.
Right.
That sergeant will take direction from the director of racing, and always, the colonel is the overall head of the state police. That would be Major Hughes also, who has will have direct responsibility for troopers working in gaming as well as troopers working in racing. And we've already had preliminary discussions about that synergy and how we'd like to see that work. And they're familiar. These are voluntary assignments, so that you agree to these terms when coming into these
Right.
assignments.
Right. Okay. The other thing is not, let's see, where are you on your list? Yeah. I, for one, don't really understand how the racing division gets funded. And I know, sort of, and there's been the issue about the lack of an appropriation and so forth, and I would really appreciate a presentation, maybe next time or whenever you're ready, or whoever's ready, to just explain to us the income and expense structure.
You bet.
And are we under control? Do we have enough? Do we not have enough? Do we need that? Was there that problem? Did that problem get fixed, et cetera?
You got it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next.
Okay, the next piece of the racing division update is mine, and that is a tentative decision. And this is in the matter of John Halloran. And I conducted a formal adjudicatory proceeding on October 18th. In this matter, Mr. Halloran is a licensed owner-trainer at Suffolk Down Racetrack, and he was ejected by the state police on September 24th of 2012. Mr. Halloran was present and represented by counsel at the hearing. State Police Sergeant Scanlon, as well as Trooper Miller, testified in this matter, and Lynn Sharon, a witness, also testified in this matter. Findings of fact. On September 24th, the appellant was present in the barn at Suffolk Downs Racetrack. The appellant engaged in an argument with Mr. Vincent Amico, another licensed owner-trainer, and bound to a wheelchair. The argument led to a fight, which resulted in the appellant being arrested and charged with assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. So there was police intervention at that point. There was discussion in the matter about whether or not the appellant, Mr. Halloran, used a weapon. It's alleged that scissors were used, and there were puncture wounds with Mr. Amico, the other individual involved in this altercation. The appellant testified, as did his girlfriend, Ms. Sharon. There was some less than credible testimony in this matter, talking about who did what and what the reasons for this were. I think the testimony was self-serving. We did not have the ability just to listen to the other individual involved in this altercation, but it's not necessary that we, as a commission, draw conclusions about this. It is a police matter. That will be handled in a criminal court. But what was undisputed was the fact that there was a physical altercation with Mr. Amico, who is in a wheelchair. There was adequate evidence for the commission to find the appellant did in fact start that altercation. He accused the individual of stealing, and it's my decision that we uphold the finding, which is that the individual was ejected, and we uphold that ejection order at this time. The criminal matter is still ongoing, has not been heard at this time. Certainly, so again, my tentative decision will be that we uphold that ejection, and the appellant realizes he has the right to reconsideration, 30 days to file any written objections to the full commission. Just a summary of the hearing that was held on the 18th. That concludes my report, and I believe that concludes the Racing Division report.
There was the auditor.
That's true.
That's correct.
Commissioner Zuniga was going to speak to us about the auditor's report.
Yes, thank you. We met with the state auditor for the transition audit that was done at our request. They have supplied this draft audit. This requires no action by the commission. It's just included for our information. It is a no findings report, so the state auditor will not necessarily wait for any actions by this commission or comments from anybody to issue this report in the next few days. Of note is something highlighted here at the end of the report, which has to do with the funding for certain payments to cities and towns that were repealed by the Gaming Act and then later reinstated by the legislature as part of an outside section to the budget. The gist of the comment here by the state auditor is that a recommendation that this commission seek the advice of the Attorney General to interpret effectively what these two legislative actions did on the matter.
So we're going to follow through on that?
We are.
Okay.
What is the question for the Attorney General?
What happens is certain payments to cities and to the cities and towns that host the racing operations are statutory in nature. Those were repealed by the Gaming Act. Right. The legislature realized this and reinstated those payments, directed the state treasurer, who is the one who makes these payments and used to make all these payments in the past, to reinstate them. And so they did. But this difference in time created a gap, if you will, of 3 quarterly payments, 2 of which were made, 1 of which was not made. It would appear, because of this gap that I described, that nobody had the authority, the legislative authority, to conduct the 2 payments that were effectively made. So the opinion that we will be seeking is whether this commission needs to seek return of those monies or not, and whether there's any legislative action for this third payment. In my view, in my opinion, the reinstatement of those payments signals legislative intent. And this is where the Attorney General may very well be able to offer an opinion. We will also ask of the legislature what their intention is for fiscal year 14, because the payments that I just described were reinstated only for fiscal year 13. Is that correct, Eileen? Fiscal year 13, they were reinstated. Two of them were made. Fiscal year 14, they're now just going through that process at the legislature.
Right. Okay, thank you. All right,
Thank you.
anything else, Racing Division? Thank you. Public education and education outreach, our ombudsman.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the commission.
Want to introduce yourself to our audience of thousands?
John Ziemba, the Ombudsman for the Gaming Commission. Last week, I reported to the commission I was in the process of making initial contacts with communities, applicants, and state agencies regarding my role as ombudsman and pending questions that are out there. I had a series of meetings last week and earlier today on a number of different matters. I'll give you a flavor of some of those matters. We talked about obviously the policy questions that we'll be discussing in the early part of December, and we asked for comments from all of those groups that I just mentioned before. I think that hopefully we'll get some pretty substantial comments on a number of different questions. One of the prevalent questions was around the issue of surrounding communities and how they're defined, and I know we'll be discussing that obviously as the time goes on. We also discussed the need for additional guidance regarding Gaming Commission assistance relative to the application fee portion, the $50,000 out of the $400,000. I reported there's been some issues regarding municipal finance law that we have to clarify in that regard, and I think we're in a position now. Commissioner Zuniga and I met with Division of Local Services, Department of Revenue earlier today, and I think we received some really good answers from the division on how we can go forward, especially for some of the smaller communities that may not have the ability to appropriate up front, and they might have to wait for a town meeting. We promised the Division of Local Services that we would be working on our draft documents, and we would share them with the division in the near term before we advance those to the communities, which hopefully is only a matter of weeks. Obviously, communities are now ramping up their local processes for review. They're in the process of taking a look at local consultants, and even though the $50,000 application fee portion would only be a small portion of what they would eventually need to take a look at all the local impacts, it'd be great if we could get out some good information to them soon about the application process and how we consider surrounding communities as part of that application process. I met with the Department of Transportation about the protocol and how we work with them on a going forward basis. We talked about different ways to efficiently keep each other in the loop, and we also talked about potentially the need for amending the protocol, probably not in the immediate term, but somewhat in the future as more meetings happen between state agencies and predominantly the transportation agencies, but it will be a number of different agencies. I told them that I would love to be kept up to date regarding all of those meetings, especially at the near term. It's important for the commission, but at some point it just might be an unwieldy process for us to be involved in every one of those meetings. We had a follow-up on our conversation last week with MIPA regarding the whole process of how does MIPA fit within our process, and I guess I'll ask to table that question until the later date when we discuss this from the policy perspective in those December meetings. But of critical importance is where our applicants where will applicants be in the MIPA process by the time we reach the endpoint of our review, and how do those different timetables work, and can they work, and are there different things that we can consider to make sure that people are well informed through the MIPA process, but while not unnecessarily tying things up. We had some conversations with representatives from the regional planning agencies to ask how they can potentially help us in all of our reviews. And I think we discussed a couple of both short and long-term ways that we can work together. On the short term, we're actively soliciting their involvement in some of the policy questions that we'll be determining. And then on a longer range basis, perhaps there's more of a role that they could play, especially since they have a really good knowledge of the surrounding communities around each one of these applications. But more to come with that as we flesh things out. We continue to research some of the local issues that were discussed in some of my initial contacts. One of those was the auditors, the donut hole issue that was just discussed by the commission. And we followed up with the applicants on some of their initial meetings that they had with our consultants, and we forwarded a number of questions and application materials to the consultants. I just want to highlight a couple of items regarding my conversations with the communities. In Springfield, you may have seen from the news that their application process has been bumped by a couple of weeks. So initially, they had a December 14th date by which they were going to respond to RFPs. That has now been moved to January 3rd. And the one other thing I wanted to clarify, the city...
What was that, John? They're going to respond to the RFPs?
No, the application date for applicants to submit materials to Springfield has been moved from December 14th to January.
This is the second round.
This is the phase 2, yeah.
Phase 2 application. And one other thing we clarified with the city of Springfield, they had a timeline for their draft RFP that had the local process, the local vote process occurring in June. And we talked about how that may or may not work depending on where our phase 1 license application process progresses. And they confirmed that they are bound by their initial understanding with the commission that they will move forward after our process. So I thought that was very good, and they wanted to make sure that you are aware of that.
After our suitability checks. Right.
So those were target dates in the RFP, but they are amendable depending on circumstances. If everything works out great, that's great, but they confirm that they're held by that understanding.
Didn't sound like any of the things you mentioned particularly come into this category, but just reminding you to be mindful of anything that you do substantively communicate to one community needs to go up on the website somewhere in the Q&A, so everybody gets access to this, or to one developer, so everybody gets access to the same information.
Yeah, I'm mindful of that, and I think some things need to be added to the website fairly soon, especially in timelines and some updating of questions and some of the process regarding the application standards that the commissioner and I discussed. So that's forthcoming.
Okay, great.
I have a question, if I may, that it's actually probably jumping into the next item in the agenda, which is a public educational forum with the architects. And I'm wondering if there has been any thought or it's already as part of the agenda of that forum to include or have a discussion relative to the MIPA process and how the timing that we're contemplating, both at the commission's, from the commission standpoint and from the local standpoint, could be informed by this group, who usually has a lot of, the architects who usually have a lot of experience with this process themselves. So if it hasn't already, I figured that might be worth putting in the agenda for that forum.
Well, that's been Commissioner Stebbins' project, kind of, right?
Okay.
Aren't you coordinating with them?
Yep.
So I would throw that out to them and see whether or not they think that fits. It doesn't quite strike me as in the kinds of things that they really had in their agenda, but that doesn't mean their agenda couldn't change. So can you check that out with them and see if that fits? Okay, thanks. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Speaking of which, the AIA Forum,
Sure. A quick update. This forum is coming up on December 12th. It's been organized for us by 3 different groups. The Mass chapter of the American Institute of Architects, the Boston Society of Architects, and the American Council of Engineering Corporations. So a number of new acronyms for all of us to learn. They're proposing this public forum entitled Promoting Sustainability, Strengthening Communities, and Achieving Design Excellence, a new model for Massachusetts casinos. It's going to be held on December 12th here in Boston at, I believe, the BSA offices over at 290 Congress Street.
and that's in the morning, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
from 8 to 12. Basically, they're covering a handful of topics. They're going to give us an overview, exciting examples of comparable large-scale projects that are exemplary, sustainability, how to introduction to high-performance buildings, strengthening communities' ways to design casinos that help local towns and regions, minimizing traffic impacts, linking casinos with local workforces, and then design excellence, design scale and massing of a project to be appropriate for the community in the setting. Why this topic? Well, the statute in 2 areas gives us the ability to issue regulations or promulgate regs relative to the architectural design and concept excellence of a casino under Section 5 and Section 18, which is more of the evaluation criteria of a license application. It touches on this topic in 3 areas: realizing maximum capital investment, building a gaming establishment of high caliber, and subsection 8 focuses on the interest in seeing the proposed casino utilize sustainable development principles in LEED certification. Their hope is to conduct this forum and at the end kind of pull all the comments and feedback together into a white paper. Hopefully they can turn that around in time as we consider the Phase 2 regs. I know this is a policy question, I think, under Commissioner McHugh's portfolio relative to the design standards. Hopefully this forum will help us answer a number of those questions.
and that's being properly announced. Chief of Staff Riley, now that you're back in public meeting and so forth and so on.
We have this going on the calendar. I think Elaine drafted an announcement for it.
Can we stream it from there?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Great, that'll be terrific.
One of the quick changes we had to their agenda, I asked that they include the State Department of Energy resources as well as the folks from the Clean Energy Center, talk about state resources that might be available to the operators in terms of reaching sustainable energy standards. A number of the communities that are entertaining a casino application are state-designated green communities, so I hope it would help for the operators to understand what that state green community designation might mean to their design, but they're going to put those folks at the table as well.
Great. Anything else on that? That'll be a good one. Okay, item community college institutes.
We have a number of folks from the Casino Career Training Institute, President Messner, Jeff Hayden, Bob LePage, I think Mike Souser from SDCC, giving us an update to their plan, talking about plan implementation, as well as 2 draft MOUs, but I'll hand it over to the good president to proceed.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be back with you. We have with us today out in the audience a variety of individuals who are members of the statewide collaborative that we've put together now over the last 4 to 5 months. And I'd just like to introduce a few of those folks. We've got Bill Hart, Executive Director from the Community College Office, Carol Cowan, who's president of Middlesex Community College. Along with Carol, we've got Judy Burke and Audrey Nalabedian, I believe, from their workforce area. From Bunker Hill, we've got Les Warren from the workforce area, Springfield Technical College, Mike Souser back there someplace. There he is. From the Hotel Training Institute, we have Murray Downey. And from the UAW, Barry Hawk. And we may have a few other folks out there as well that I'm missing. If there are, my apologies. We agreed back in the summer that we would meet with you again in the fall and put before you a report with a set of recommendations relative to moving forward on meeting the workforce needs of the casino industry. We've done that, and hopefully you've had time to look at that report, statewide initiative addressing the workforce needs of the gaming industry of Massachusetts. Embedded in that report are a series of recommendations, and the primary recommendation that we would hope to discuss with you today is the signing of a memorandum of understanding between the Casino Careers Training Institute and the Gaming Commission in regard to putting in place a formal process of planning specific to licensure training, as well as to the broader topic of workforce implementation. And as a part of that memorandum of understanding, recognizing the Massachusetts Career Training Institute as the exclusive provider of licensure training for gaming-related positions within the casino industry. So we can, I think it might be well for me to stop talking at this point. You folks hopefully have had the opportunity to look at the set of recommendations and the narrative that we put in front of you. And if you do have questions today, we'll certainly try and answer those for you.
No, please.
Well, I was just gonna say, lay out the logic and rationale for the exclusivity, what that means to you.
Yeah, before I do that, if I may, I do want to emphasize that there is a logic and a rationale relative to exclusivity, which we'll be happy to discuss. I would suggest to you that those of us who've been involved in this process, both the 15 community colleges as well as the variety of workforce partners throughout the state who've been involved over the last 6 months in putting this proposal together, our involvement does not hinge on the notion of exclusivity. We are pushing forward with this initiative because we believe that's part of our mission. As community colleges and as workforce providers, we believe this is a critical initiative for the Commonwealth. It's part of our mission, and we will be involved in it as best we can, whether the Commission recognizes us as the exclusive provider or not. Having said that, the notion of exclusivity grows out of the fact that, number one, we have put into place a statewide, regional-based consortium comprised of a broad array of workforce providers. Community colleges are at the heart of that. 15 public institutions that have a long, and I would suggest, rich history of providing workforce training of a quality, on a quality basis for a wide variety of industries. Further, those community colleges over that 60 years or so have developed a set of connections with other workforce providers, both public and nonprofit. We have demonstrated that we're able to collaborate in a way that can leverage resources and meet community needs. We came to you not just with a concept, but we came to you already with those regional collaboratives fairly well-fashioned, and over the last 5 months, we've broadened those collaboratives as well. Exclusivity, we believe, will allow the commission to focus on one set of providers and one set of providers only, will allow the developers to focus on a single set of providers, and I think most importantly, will allow potential job applicants to focus on a single set of providers as opposed to an array of providers, some of which may and some of which may not be well positioned to meet the needs of the casino industry. Having said that, let me say again, while we believe it's in everyone's best interest to agree to the notion of exclusivity, we can fully understand why you might not, at this moment in time, be ready to agree to that. And if you're not, that's fine, and we will push ahead, hopefully with the commission in terms of this planning process.
Can I build up a little bit on that?
Sure.
And which is the time that we find ourselves, and I read through this proposal, and it's very thoughtful, and I thank you for that. There will be a steady state of licensees eventually, where clearly we don't know who they are at this point, but at that time in the future they may have very important input into the workforce development, including ideas or approaches that may not be contemplated here. So it's a bit of a catch-22. Until we get to that point, we don't know their input or alternatives. Can you expound on that notion? What do you foresee for when licensees become licensees, and how that input or the other models that they have for workforce development may be incorporated as part of this?
Okay.
I would note, so that the element of the workforce components with the individual operators and the licensees that sit outside the governance of the commission continues through the consortiums on an ongoing basis now, looking at those non-licensed gaming occupations. And that will be a continuum for all organizations in the Commonwealth that provide education. The licensed occupations, there's kind of 3 or 4 key elements to the licensed occupations. One, the requirements of setting up policies and procedures to be able to inform the people responding to the RFP process is going to be timely. Even within a city RFP process, like Springfield is an example, there are already questions arising: what will a licensed employee really be? And how does that relate back to what I have to respond to in my RFP, where I have to clarify my process for workforce development? So the commission being able to define steps will help all operators, particularly in the startup phase, to be able to complete RFP and have clarity. 2, I think that there is a time frame or a difference between the scale-up phase of projects, as you've seen in other states, where during a timeline, maybe it's the first 5 years or some time period, they do have an exclusivity or a very controlled process that once the labor force is stabilized, they may go to additional providers and go to a multi-provider kind of process. But in the early phase, it's really to give comfort to the commission that they can have a streamlined process, they can have clarity of the process. And I think, as we've mentioned, exclusivity in this part is very important because of the need to communicate how this is all going to be done timely to the citizens who now are seeing schools pop up. And I would envision we will see more of them with the recent passage of gaming in Rhode Island. We will see border schools that will now be advertising to Massachusetts citizens. Become licensed, your future is here. So there's a lot of those elements, specific elements that point to other states' decision are relative to the security of gaming, security of facility, security of data, security of process and policies for handling of data and relationships between the certification process and the licensure process, including other partners like the state police who may be part of the background checks. So I think establishing a single partner provides the commission clarity that will back up the timelines that will be required for the RFP process as well.
And Commissioner, two elements I think that are important. Number one is the community colleges providing workforce training. No matter who the employer is, that employer has to be part of that process, or it's not going to work. And that's the case whether it be food service training or whether it be for healthcare or for the casino industry. And so we need to make sure that the employers and the participants, those seeking jobs, are part of the process all the way through. There'll be a collaborative approach that needs to be part of the infrastructure of this, which is why we've suggested the workforce implementation planning part that we can talk about in a little bit. The other piece is that even with exclusivity, to do the licensure training requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. And so the community-based organizations, the organized labor organizations and training ability that they have, the apprenticeship programs that they have, the community colleges, the career centers, the regional employment boards, all of those different pieces that are part of the current workforce system need to be part of this. Number one is because we're talking about a massive amount of folks that need to be recruited, screened, and then a significant amount that need to be trained, counseled, and placed into jobs. Follow-up needs to be done, and then ongoing incumbent worker training needs to be done. And so community colleges can't do all those pieces, which is why we need to have the partnership with all the other various workforce folks. So even with the community colleges doing exclusive training in terms of licensure, there are several components that we're going to depend on those other partners. And again, as the president said, and even without that, we'll still be engaged in this process.
How does this process exactly work? So would it be that at the end of the training education period, the people who had been in the licensed jobs tracks would get a license, so that would obviate any need for the commission to have its employees or staff do any kind of background checks? This would be the commission's licensing process.
That's right.
It would dovetail. Certain components would be done by the community colleges. Certain components, I would think, for example, background checks would be done in place of the system designed by the state police. So that's where the planning stage, I think, is so important now. Is once you have the players at the table, not to use it, can't be analogy, but once you have the players at the table, you really can start to build those specifics of how this is going to go together. It is fairly complex relative to timelines and roles and information systems if you really want to ensure the integrity of it. Yeah. But there are definitely other people's roles, like the state police, who are going to be part of this. In timing, people have done this different ways in different states. Of do you do the background checks at the end, and then the commission certifies them? Do you do part of them at the beginning of the process, so we don't have citizens who go through a whole training process then find that they're not employable in the industry? So some of this is going to get in the design stage, which we're advocating now, the implementation planning stage, because there's moving parts to the puzzle.
Right. And ideally, Chairman, this planning would be done in concert with the commission, and so the planning identifies and designs the approach. and then the implementation effort is designed as well. At the end of the day, the commission needs to, as required by legislation, needs to be the granting authority for the license.
Where did you get the idea for this model? I'm not familiar with this model.
And what part of the model specifically?
Well, the piece where you're involved in the licensing.
The licensing of employees.
Yes.
It's done that way in in other states.
Do you have an example?
Delaware, Pennsylvania, moving that way, similar.
But there's no
in Ohio.
exclusivity there.
There is exclusivity relative to granting the particular organization. It wasn't for example, in Pennsylvania, they didn't give it exclusive to all community colleges in the state, because not every community college in the state was close enough or serving the casino. So it wasn't done for the whole state, it was done for individual institutions.
You're talking about Pennsylvania?
Mm-hmm. It was done for individual institutions, and in that state, they also did reciprocal, as you're aware, we talked about in the past, they also have reciprocal agreements with other states. So it does go back to a planning process that's kind of the next stage of getting to the nitty-gritty of how you want to do that.
Yeah, we don't presume to have the specifics of this process. I mean, ultimately, you're going to have to affirm that, not us. What we are recommending today, that we or some other entity, we're suggesting we be the entity, sit down with you and work through this process over the next several months to answer just some of the questions that you're raising today. We've done our best to outline for you in this document how we think broadly the process should work. But there are still many details that need to be nailed down, and we're willing and we think able to work with you in that. We're asking today for you to sign on to a memorandum of agreement with or without exclusivity that says you will join us to hash out these details over the next several months.
One of the things that I should no doubt know the answer to, but as the more I think about it, is that the key to my approach to this, and that is, what does the license represent?
Right.
Does somebody wind up as a licensed blackjack dealer or a licensed croupier, or is it the license simply that the person is of good moral character and has the requisite background to be an employee of a casino in the gaming room area, and the certificate of training or the validation of experience elsewhere is what the casino operator uses to make a hiring decision, using the license as a baseline?
Well, and not to muddy the waters, but it'll get there.
It'll get muddy?
Yes. Certification and licensure, we need to make sure that we're talking about two distinct things.
Right.
So
that.
certification being, and just very quickly, but certification being an employability. So background check, Corey Sorry, drug testing, basic educational ability.
Right.
The ability to work in a casino is granted through that certification. And that's a process that you define and then you grant, given the fact that people follow or are eligible for all those criteria. The licensure is for that, as you mentioned, that specific job. And so someone might be trained in blackjack. They also might be trained in another game in order to give them flexibility for job opportunities, or to give the employer the flexibility to have someone take different positions. But going to the employer would be looking, can you work in a casino? Are you certified? And B, do you have the training necessary?
Well, is that certification slash licensure process, it's separation of the two, is that something you read in the statute, or is that something you superimposed on the statute?
It is in the statute.
Okay.
And it gives the commission the authority to set the process, the policies, and the guidelines, and it also gives the commission the authority to determine who will be approved to provide that training. And it even goes so far as giving the commission the authority to define what are the requirements of that training as far as the quality of skill sets or curriculum.
Yes, that's right, it does the latter too. But I hear what you're saying about the former as well. I hear what you're saying.
So for example, one concern, or one thing that has to be resolved, there are other agencies either within the state who might have the ability to grant nonprofit organizations the ability to do training. That organization could get approved by another state agency to be able to do training, but not to do the training because you have jurisdiction or authority relative to the gaming occupations by statute. So one of the things that has to happen in the planning process is alignment to other infrastructure or other policies that are in the state, because I think you want to ensure that the integrity of gaming is happening and that we don't have another body within the state say, okay, you can go open up a gaming school because they don't understand the regulations of equipment, they don't understand the regulations that those people won't be employable, given that role of the commission. So some of that in itself has to be worked out.
And it's common practice today that the actual gaming companies provide this training. That happens throughout the country. How are you addressing that issue?
We have sat down with most, if not all, of the developers who have come forward and exposed themselves, for lack of a better term, and had initial discussions relative to needs. We have also developed a memorandum of understanding between the Institute on a regional basis and the developers, region by region, which frankly we've held off on going to them with until such time as we nail down with you folks some of these details that we're talking about today. But we fully intend to go to each of those developers who are in the mix and lay out a set of understandings as to how each of the regions will proceed with the chosen developer to address the specific workforce needs of that casino and what will be the role of the casino developer, what will be the role of the community colleges and the other parts of the collaborative. Quite frankly, the ones that we've talked with, and we coming from the West, where much of this action is currently going on, uniformly the developers have embraced this notion of working with a regional collaborative rather than having to work with 23 different organizations who might be willing to be involved in training. That's not to say that they've taken a position on exclusivity. They have not, and they will not, I'm sure. But they certainly have embraced the notion of focusing the discussion and the work of developing a workforce with a collaborative approach.
The planning piece that would be the next step. Figuring out priorities, details, what have you. Can you give us an idea of resources needed, monetary and timing as well? You identify resources for the training,
yeah,
which are important, and I appreciate all these available places that we will be all looking at.
Well,
but what about the planning?
Yeah, the issue of resources is an interesting one. We're moving ahead with this, assuming the commission says you'll work with us. To the extent that you can bring some resources to the table to help us with the planning, it would certainly be welcome, particularly given in the last week we've been hearing about the potential for 9 C cuts for our operations. So resources are limited. Irrespective, though, of what you can bring to the table, we're going to move ahead on this. It's part of our mission. We're committed to it to the extent that you can bring resources to help us with planning. And those, and we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars here for this. But I would think, and here I'm, picking numbers out of the air, but something on the range of $30,000 to $50,000 might be involved in this planning process. To the extent that you can help with that, God bless you.
What about a timeline? How do you envision this planning phase?
Let me defer to the experts on that.
I envision it in 2 stages. The planning phase for the licensure component of the workforce development, which really fits under the purview of the work of the commission, to be about a 4-month phase that would then help define the policies and procedures, come up with the clarity on who would be best to deliver it, because I think that there is the dialogue of how is it best delivered by whom. In about 4 months, that is important, I think, that timeline, because you want to be able to include any information that's pertinent to your RFP2 process that may be released a couple months later than that, so that the casino operators understand what will be required for them to successfully employ people. And then the other element is going to need to be longer on the workforce component, because some of the decisions in Part 1 will flow to Workforce 2, to the broader workforce dialogue. So you might be looking at 5 to 6 months. They could be running on concurrent tracks. We would suggest that the commission form 2 task forces that work collaboratively, because there, as I said, a planning task force for licensure may require representatives from the state police, community colleges, and some other organizations. A broader state planning group that could talk about workforce strategies in partnership with the commission, I think, is equally important, because it represents a larger percentage of the total jobs.
I had a question about this licensing procedure. I am not familiar with the model. I'm very familiar with, clearly laying out what the disqualifiers would be, the kinds of issues in a background that would eliminate an individual so that they do not invest in something that is not attainable. I am not familiar with using investigative resources before that person has a conditional offer of employment. I just have never seen it, and frankly, I can't imagine. Investigative resources are very expensive, and to use that ahead of time for individuals who may not be offered a job, I just...
And that may be part of how a process is defined. It might be the stages of the depth of the investigative resources.
So, for example, when we're working with certified nurses' aides, and we know at the end of their training that we will have a position for them. We begin the process by asking them to do a query sorting first. And we say to them that without the ability to have a query sorry, a clean query sorry, that you will not get employment by the group of employers that we have. So we do that first, then we initiate the training. And then upon that, it would be up to the employer whether or not to redo the query sorry for the period of the training time, et cetera.
And certainly your model, as used in other states, is that larger background check is done as part of the application for the licensure, stating that you have conditional employment. So again, that's part of the planning process of whether you're going to require, before an individual is licensed, that they have a letter of employment. That would have to be defined.
Mr. Chairman, it would appear that other colleagues behind this gentleman would want to express or weigh in, but you cannot see them because you have your backs against them.
Are you colleagues of?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're totally different. My name's Joe Tulo. I've been in the casino business for 20 years. We went and see these people. We own the New England Casino Dealer Academy at the Emerald Square Mall. We have invested $300,000. We have 100 years' experience in the casino industry. I was a dealer, a shift manager, an assistant pit manager. I ran the pits and I did the numbers. When students come into the casino, they start training immediately. The licensing process has nothing to do with the casino. It's handled by the state police. If they go to the casino and they're working and their license is denied, it might take 6 months, they're off the floor. Totally off the floor, it has nothing to do with it. My colleague here will tell you what we've been going through, trying to get our license and dealing with all the colleges. We had opened the facility because I brought all the best teachers, because we have the same curriculum as any casino in the world. We staff Foxwoods, MGM, Mohegan Sun. I've got the best teachers that I don't know how they're gonna teach in the college the games that we know, the security that we know, the procedures of these games, how to handle the chips. We've invested $300,000 between chips and tables and cards in every aspect of the casino industry. Customer service. We have a facility at the Emerald Square Mall that's absolutely fantastic. That we've been sitting there for 6 months because our license is, I don't know where it is. Now all of a sudden they put a collaborative together and they got a curriculum that they paid thousands of dollars for that we can give you for free. We have it made all up. And my partner here will tell you exactly what's going on, what we've been going through with this situation with these colleges.
Well, they haven't all of a sudden done this. This has been a work in progress for a considerable period of time, and I understand the energy behind your comments, but this has been a work in progress for a considerable period of time. It's not finished yet. We haven't made a decision yet, but this isn't something that just dropped off a mountaintop.
You had a comment, sir?
Yes. My name is Mike Tassoni. I'm the president of New England Casino Dealer Academy, and I have a bunch of comments, but first I'd like to ask a question. Is the collaborative asking that you give them exclusive rights to train and private industry cannot enter that domain and train for casinos? Because our intent when we opened at Emerald Square Mall was one of convenience. Close to Massachusetts, close to Rhode Island. We have contacts with Twin River Casino, Foxwoods, Mohegan, who are asking us to supply them with trained dealers, which we can't because we don't have our license yet. If that's part of what they're trying to do, I have some serious questions that need to be raised. Number one, the community colleges have zero expertise in the casino business. Or do they have any instructors that are qualified to teach? Because back in July, Dr. Messner invited myself and Joe to Holyoke College, met with Mr. Hayden, and we discussed all of this, and they were talking about outsourcing the resources to us, for us to provide them with instructors, because they had none. Now all of a sudden, it looks like they're trying to backdoor this whole deal and get exclusive and push us out of the business before we start. In addition to that, back in August, Mr. Barati, the dean over at Bristol Community College, him and his crew came and visited our academy, as well as Mr. Hayden did on a different occasion. And most recently in October, Paul Robillard brought an entire class to our academy and ran a class there for 4 or 5 hours. They can attest to the fact that we have an absolute 100% professional organization. How you can allow community colleges with zero expertise in the gaming industry, specifically in training dealers, is absurd. Our instructors have a minimum of 10 years experience on the floor. Dr. Messner was talking about some people coming in from New Jersey and training their staff for 6 or 8 weeks to teach these courses. That's not practical experience. That's not experience on the floor, which is critical. Those students will fail miserably, I guarantee it. We have the expertise in the business. Not me personally,
Okay.
I'm a businessman.
You know, I think we hear your perspective, and I don't think this is, we may need to hear more about this, but I think we clearly hear your perspective at this point. So thank you for that.
What is the answer to the, I'm not 100% clear on what the certification, so were you, first of all, you made it clear that exclusivity is not a deal breaker here, and everybody should hear that. But you said, would the request for exclusivity be that we would be the only people who could certify, or I guess it's licensed, that somebody is capable now of being hired by a casino? So it's the training skills. It's not, I mean, the background check is our business. So what you're talking about is training people to be able to go to a facility. The casino knows that they've got this license, I guess, not certification, and you would be the only ones authorized to give that. Is that what we're talking about? It has to do what's,
Yeah, I believe so.
what's certified.
If I'm understanding you correctly. The consortium would be the one who would be recognized. And let me underline, it's the consortium. It's not just 15 community colleges, and the consortium has many other partners. I'm resisting the notion of responding to the comments that were just made, but let me say that there was nothing to preclude for-profit providers to be involved in the consortium if they so desire to be. So it's not just the 15 community colleges, certainly. We believe that a consortial approach is the most effective way of meeting the workforce needs. That's our belief. It's not the only way of meeting the workforce needs. We don't presume to say that. We think it's the preferable way. We are committed to this approach, and we will pursue this approach irrespective of that issue. You know, beyond that,
Yeah, okay.
Would it be helpful to highlight and make the distinction that you make in the document here about the different layers of and the different occupations? I think that for the public usually thinks of casino jobs as the dealers, but it does involve, as you correctly point out, a lot of other occupations and disciplines. Is that something that might be helpful at this point?
Yeah, just one final point. The licensed positions are a distinct minority of the positions within the casino industry that we're talking about here. 70% more or less of the jobs are outside of the license field. We are talking that there needs to be a focus in terms of the planning relative to them. But that's not, this discussion of exclusivity has nothing to do with those 70% of the jobs.
But that brings me back to my question, because as we were looking here, I looked through the statute and looked through it quickly, of course, to see this distinction between certification and licensure. And I come back to the basic question of what does licensure represent? Does it represent a license as a specific, for a specific function in the casino, or does it represent something broader, and then some kind of a certificate or certification allows the person, shows that the person has been trained to a certain level? And I'd welcome your, when you get a minute, sending an email showing how you interpreted the statute, because I just can't find that. And for me, it's an important question. Not the determinative question, but an important question. Mr. President, would you tease out a little bit more of the consortium concept? Because when you say that private trainers could be part of the consortium, that changes my view of what the consortium is.
We've never defined our consortiums narrowly to say it can include such, but it cannot include such and such. We have agreed, and the gentleman referred to it, that we have signed an agreement with Atlantic Cape Community College, as we told you at our initial meeting, who are recognized nationally in many states, and beyond the United States as a premier provider of casino training to use their curriculum and to use them as consultants relative to this training. We have talked with the gentleman in the back who came to us and said that he has a casino training program, and we said, well, we've entered into this agreement with Atlantic Cape, but certainly in terms of the faculty, there may be the ability to use some of your faculty. Quite frankly, the practice as we understand it in most states is that the casinos have a preference in providing their own trainers for this. So it's difficult to sit here today and say exactly where is the faculty going to come from, but we're quite confident that we are going to find, primarily from the casinos themselves, quality people to provide this training and marry that with the curriculum from Atlantic Cape Community College.
I think that was clear in the previous presentation that you made, that the trainers would come from the casinos.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think when it's, you know, whether it's the community colleges or profit or other nonprofits, ultimately it's now at the planning stages of how is this done best and most effectively.
Right.
And that's really what we're proposing, is that we create a task force to do this planning. You know, that ultimately we believe one source for the commission makes the most sense. What that source is, I think, needs to be the outcome of a planning process that the commission then reviews.
Well,
and determines at that stage what's the best for the Commonwealth.
I definitely get what you're saying, which is you're looking for a partner to work with now because there's a lot of details to get worked out here. I get that. I also get that you're not saying exclusivity is a deal breaker. I like the idea at a presumptive level of having some single source of certification, if I'm not misusing the word in this context, for a skill set, which the casino operators have agreed, if you get this skill set, you are going to be a candidate for our jobs. There's a benefit in terms of quality control. There's benefit in the public policy objectives of diversity that we've talked about and that we want to see adhered to. So I'm presumptively comfortable with the idea of having some place be the certifier. I'm much less comfortable with minimizing the people that can feed up into that certification process. If you had a feeder system and a private organization had a feeder system and Joe Smith had a feeder system and you or somebody was the one who had the defining test that said, okay, you've passed, so that private sectors and other folks can feed into to that certification process, you know, I think that would feel fine to me. I'm not sure how the public interest is served by precluding other people to be able to produce candidates to take the certification test.
And that's really what the consortium does. It creates the feeder into that.
Right.
Yeah, that's really the goal of a consortium, is to feed into those people who will most likely be successful taking the training and will be able to be licensed for those key gaming occupations that are.
I'm going to give this
For my
gentleman
part,
one. I just want to do this.
I'm not, just on that same subject, presumptively, and I think we need to talk more about this, presumptively, I'm not comfortable with a single certification source necessarily. It seems to me there can be licensure. I mean, again, this gets back to what we're talking about. I think it's essential to have one source of licensure for in terms of determining whether somebody, which is the commission, determining background, but as in terms of a certification as a competent XYZ, I'm not convinced, presumptively, of the need for one, and I think we need to have more discussion about that.
I would agree, and I know Atlantic Community College, I'm very familiar with their programs. They are excellent, but they do not have exclusivity. And there are other facilities in Atlantic City who like to do all their own training. Casino operators, owners who like to do all their own training. So I think that there's just a wide variety here, and it's hard for me to think about I give you great credit for adopting that model. It's very successful, the community college model, but again, there is no exclusivity, and they don't have anything to do with licensing.
And then if I could suggest then that we set that specific issue aside and rather focus on how do we move forward from here with the planning process. And
I do want to give this gentleman one last big shot.
In the casino industry, we train hundreds of kids. I up in Mohegan Sun. And while they're training, they register for their license, the state police checks their license. They do not go on the casino floor unless they pass an audition. That's how it works in the casino world. In other words, if I run Twin River, there's gonna be a barrage of students, dealers from Mohegan Sun. Everybody's gonna come to Twin River looking for a job. I will sit on a game and play blackjack and watch them deal the game, make sure they understand the procedures and everything about the game. If I say that's fine, they'll have a job. But they won't have a job until the commission checks their background. Right. You know, they have to have a background check. They're gonna be Twin River, even Massachusetts, they're gonna be invaded by dealers. And basically, Massachusetts should have a certain proportion for all the people in Massachusetts to work in your casinos. They should be prepared to work in your casinos. They have to be taught by qualified teachers, because you're gonna be invaded by, the casino's gonna bring a lot of their own people in, their top people to run the casinos. You have to have experienced people on the floor, because you're gonna have cheaters and wise guys and everything. You have to have people that know how to deal with this, and
Okay.
that's what we have at our school.
Well, I think we heard, I think we get the point that you guys are making, that there's a lot more here to think about. There is a process in place, as you know, about key policy questions that we're dealing with. This is one of them. Or if it isn't exactly teed up this way in our list, we've also invited people to submit to us what other key policy questions are out there. And if you think the commission is on the wrong track or doesn't yet know the right options about this, by all means, you know, you're invited to let us know about that. I think in the meantime, are you guys, you're still looking for us for some kind of a feedback on moving forward on a working agreement, right?
that's right, and we've put in front of you an MOU, and I think based on the discussion I'm hearing today, you strike one word from it and look at the rest of it and see if the rest of it makes sense. And again, we're certainly not wedded to every notion in there, but we think it lays out a process for planning that I think is logical and one which we hope we can enter into with you.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest, and I want to provide some comments to this. You know, I've been impressed from where we started with our conversations back over the summer and where you've moved in terms of building the regional alliance. At our insistence, reaching out to the community action groups in terms of helping you find underemployed and unemployed people and building the wraparound services to this. Just sharing my own background, being on my old hat that I used to wear, doing business development. If we were right here sitting and entertaining a company looking to come to Massachusetts, $1 billion and hundreds of millions of dollars in investment in new jobs, there would be this type of partnership. If it was MOBD or another state agency, it'd be building a partnership with those public entities, community colleges, the workforce investment boards, the regional employment boards, permanent employment training, figuring how we could amass the support and services to offer training to Massachusetts residents to make sure that they had the opportunity to compete for these jobs. So even though this is economic development somewhat flipped on its ear, where we have a company that we know wants to come as opposed to us trying to shill for their services or their decision to locate here, I see it somewhat within our responsibility, at least our mission and our goals, is that we want to create opportunities for Massachusetts residents to have jobs in these casinos. And partnering with the local resources, the public resources that are out there, in this case, the community colleges, which if it was a company that needed machinists, community colleges would be right there at the forefront, not to the exclusion of a for-profit entity, but that would be the driver going forward is a public body or a public entity. Even though, again, this is somewhat flipped on its ear, I think we as a commission have a responsibility to make sure that these job opportunities that we're creating are not going to be for a huge influx of people from out of state. And we do have to create that job and that job training scenario where they're going to have an opportunity to get jobs. And the other piece of the plan that I like that the Institute has put forward is that you somewhat have developed a hook to invite people to consider a career in casino training. So they come in, we always talk about at the top of the funnel, they come in through some quick assessments, be it their skills, be it their background, be it their personal history, may not be qualified to wind up in a position on a casino floor. But you're going to the next step, the due diligence of looking for an opportunity for that person, again, might be unemployed, underemployed, to feed into another training program. And, you know, unless I'm mistaken, to the for-profit entities in the room, that may not be your goal and that may not be your mission as well, but it is the mission of the public colleges in the community colleges and all the public sector workforce people around that. I would suggest we need to do two things. I think this is a valuable relationship for the commission to have. I think maybe we are at a point of trying to find somebody that has done workforce development planning and management to consider such a position on our staff as a way to work with the Institute, again, for this plan implementation piece. If we have questions about exclusivity, we do. If we have questions about the licensure and the certification, I think we kind of somewhat setting that aside, I think we need to move forward on the implementation of the plan because we're trying to address the broader issue. And as we move along, there's little stumbling blocks, these little regulatory questions are going to come up. So I think that's step one, to offer our agreement to be in partnership. I think secondarily, on a parallel track, we also need to address the questions of a for-profit entity, which is, as you just explained, purpose of setting up where you did was more of being a training school with credible experience for convenience for people from Connecticut or Rhode Island or that part of Massachusetts. And I've been looking at what some other states have been doing relative to chartering and regulating those types of schools. Give them some type of guidance. I know Indiana regulates the schools. They lay out base curriculum requirements. They lay out information about, information you need to make available to prospective students. You lay out information about what happens with the gaming equipment, when the school closes, or security of that equipment. So I'm suggesting we move down those parallel tracks. Agree to work on the plan implementation with the Career Institute. Agree to find regulations for-profit entities to again, if they want to establish a school, that's great. I don't think we're in a position to tell anybody they shouldn't, but we need to set out some standards for everybody to kind of play by the rules with. And at the same time, reach out and either see if we can find somebody who could act as kind of our project manager on this implementation plan, either at another agency or somebody we begin to post another position for that might end up being our contribution to the plan. But kind of moving this discussion forward, moving to the next step, and also kind of addressing the need to sign an MOU and get the language right. Long-winded way of saying let's keep the ball moving
great.
That was very good, actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and reread that in the transcript, by the way. But I would agree with all of that.
Trumps all your accumulated contributions to date.
Oh, and from the past before.
I'm trying to make up for what he's already contributed.
I would agree with that notion, by the way.
I'm sorry to say that I didn't realize, I only saw the first MOU with the developer operator. I didn't see this MOU and I hadn't read it, at least in this version. I'd be happy, I think maybe we shouldn't. I think there's enough other stuff on the table that we are just now thinking about that we need to read this a little more carefully with an eye to the concerns that these folks have raised. I think the exclusivity for the time being, but only for the time being, is off the table. We are anxious to give you a partner to talk to, and we will do that ASAP. And I agree with Commissioner Stebbins that we really need a point person. It's either going to be Commissioner Stebbins or it's going to be a project manager, and I think we would be much better served if we had a person who had the work, you know, who could do this. And I think we should get about the business of trying to find that person quickly. So my suggestion, but I'm open to conversation, is that we not agree to execute this MOU yet. We give this a little bit more time, hopefully not more than a week or so, and make sure we've read this with this somewhat fuller perspective on stuff, and then proceed with you ASAP thereafter.
Sure. Well, we thank you for the time.
Not at all.
And,
Thank you for your time.
For the dialogue. It's
Yeah,
been an
we're,
interesting one.
as others have said, we're delighted that you guys have done this.
Before you leave, what is your intent for us vis-a-vis the Training Institute Developer Operator MOU? Is that just something that's in a?
Simply for your information and any suggestions, guidance you might have for us.
Okay.
Yeah, particularly if there's something in there that you take exception to, we'd like to know it now.
Well, I don't know if I take exception to it or not, and I don't want to prolong this discussion, but the last bullet on page 3, I just don't understand.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at that and see if we can clarify it for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
I'm going to suggest a brief break, and we'll be back shortly. All right, I think we will reconvene with a much, much sparser audience. And little do they know what they're going to miss. They are going to be very sad they missed this. Before I get started, I will say one of the fellows from DPL Racing Commission came down to me and showed me the license, which says, in effect, this license is subject to any rules and regs and that the commission wants to issue even during its term. So if it turned out for some reason or other that we did find something that was material to think about in that issue I was discussing, it turns out we do have the ability to address that.
Can I also mention, and for the record, the size of the bond is $125,000,
Okay.
not $100,000.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so we are now looking for the report from our Director of Communications and Outreach.
Okay, hello, everybody.
Oh, are we ready?
Yeah, well, I'm only sorry that not everybody wanted to
We
stay
should've
for
put
my
you up
logo
first,
presentation.
We
So.
get them all back.
Right.
Okay, so let me first just say some additional things besides this that are going on right now, is that I've started just promoting the Casino Design Forum. I started that process this morning, as well as working on various ways to get the word out on the policy questions, to basically maximize public feedback before that November 27th deadline. So we've been working really hard on that. And that process is ongoing. And then, so yesterday, I had a conference call with the folks at Jack Rabbit, and what they did go ahead and do was, based on the logo from last week that everybody seemed to be the most drawn to out of all of the ones that they had shown us, they went ahead and sort of applied it to, just so that you could sort of see it at work, basically. So I'll show you that really quickly. There we go. Okay, so this was the one that, after all was said and done last week, seemed to be the one out of all of them that we were most drawn to. So they just sort of put it in context there, some background. Again, and then sort of marked the thought process behind fair, transparent, participatory. Yeah.
Can I offer one quick?
Sure.
I wonder if fair would be better on the top, more like a balance.
Okay, yeah, just so you know, you wouldn't see,
Oh, you wouldn't see that?
no, no, no,
Okay.
no, no. Except for maybe in a style guide that would explain it, but that's just to show their creative thought process. I think the only one that really matters is the one that's transparent. And then here you can see it just as a possibility on business cards.
So those are the backs of the cards?
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
So this one is actually interesting in that it has room for basically the one main sentence of our mission statement. And this might be like the cover of a brochure or, you know, again, it's just a mock-up so that you can see it working. And then, based on some of our conversations from last week, here are the additional variations that they came up with. There was some request to put the laurels in. Minus the abstract image, obviously. So all of the different adaptations, there's everything that we discussed basically last week, what they took from that. So the question is are we at a point where we think we can work with one of these and grow from it, or are we still in a place where we're asking them for more creative?
I think that the director might be perturbed if we don't make a decision here.
No, I mean, it's a tough decision.
Sort of
It's a difficult decision, and we're gonna have to
We're
live with
making it
it.
difficult.
crossing the finish line just out of breath.
Well, I think what happens too, by the way, is I think with the creative team too, if you continually ask them for adaptations, it gets to a point where it's so far away from the original concept that it really starts to dilute it, you know?
Well, I could live with the first one.
I could also.
So could I.
It's, we could more than live with it. We really like it.
Yeah, right, no, that wasn't meant to be damning with faint praise.
Right.
I was gonna say I'd go for one, you know, I mean, I think I like it, you know, I think that idea of going with the seal thing was a breakthrough thought when we got to that. I think it's great, so.
All right, good.
Let's go for it.
Great. All right, which means,
Ta-da!
yay. Yeah, which is great because.
See all those people miss that, man?
But it's great because that means they can really get moving on everything else. And the fact of the matter is that we're in desperate need to be able to put a template to things such as, you know, policy questions that might need to go out to surrounding communities and host communities, and we can really start to put together some nice packages of information that we need to get out there to people. So we're going to get that process moving quickly. I've already started asking some people for content for the website. So, for example, I've asked for executive staff bios and things like that. The one last thing that I actually will bring up today is I'm also, I have to begin discussions this week with whoever the web host will be. They're going to help me identify the best person to do that, which means we're going to have to purchase domain names and things like that at this point. So, which is an inexpensive thing to do. But I was wondering, they were asking us if we had any thoughts. I mean, you know, my instinct is massgaming.gov. The question is that, would that create any confusion, do we think, with mass.gov/gaming? Or would we be interested in like a massgaming.org? Is there any thought process to that?
Are there other agencies that have their own URLs that aren't a derivative of mass.gov?
There are a few.
There used to be, and like DOR had their own, but, I mean, DMV, the registry, you know.
Right,
but,
and Lottery has their own.
They do?
Lottery has their own.
Okay.
Can we get a Gov designation?
That's a good question. So, I'm not sure on that, so we're gonna work all that out. I think we should be able to. I can't imagine that we wouldn't be. But I was a little wary with it being too close, because we're gonna maintain we're gonna maintain some level of presence on mass.gov, by the way, but it'll be more of a stagnant, whereas this one will give us the opportunity. This one will be changing every day, you know, with blog updates.
Can't they be the same? If you go to mass.gov/gaming, mass.gov/gaming, can it take you to our site?
I don't think so. It doesn't appear that they let the other ones do that. I think I only saw one site that allowed for that, one agency.
Eileen, you have a?
You know, on the mass.gov ones, they have a standard format for how it's presented, really, in the interest of trying to present a single face of government.
Right.
So the template that's used for our home page there and subsequent pages are standard when you sign on to mass.gov. We can have a link there that would take us to the mass gaming .gov if that's what we end up with. And then the other option would be to buy up the variations of that .net, .org,
Yeah, we should probably do that
and then
anyways,
those all
but,
point to what the main
right.
one is.
Yeah, we should definitely purchase the variations.
Well, if we can get massgaming.gov, I think
Okay.
I don't think it's a problem that it's not gonna be confusing, I don't think.
Okay.
If we're clear about, if we're clear about not using the mass.gov URL and having our separate URL, I guess they do permit that, then I think massgaming.gov is good.
Okay, great. So that will happen this week.
Great?
Excellent. Great.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we're getting close here. On the research agenda, we are targeting this week, next couple of days, to get the RFP out.
Yeah, we have a draft on our possession.
Okay.
With a couple of questions that I need to review with Director Glovsky and yourself.
Okay.
To finalize probably tomorrow.
Okay.
But we have something from our.
Okay, good. Well, I'm gonna go back to the office now, so are you gonna go back? Maybe.
Probably not, but I can forward you what
Or
was forwarded.
If you just get it to me,
Yep.
yeah. Tomorrow's, I'm really tight tomorrow. On internet gaming, I was gonna do some further research on the Reed-Kyle bill, which I've not done. And I don't think there's much else to talk about on either of those topics. Was there anybody else have anything on either of those topics? Any other business? Then I think we can call it a day. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.